white as snow. And when you walk through that door,
oh, sweet mystery of
I was dancing many a tear.
little darling.
I hear the cottonwoods whispering above.
There was a boy who loved music, and he had a dream. Everywhere he went, he wanted to hear music, but he wanted it to sound as good as in any concert hall. So he set off on a quest, facing challenges along the way, and all to find the perfect sound.
She says, "Oh, Fred, he is a wizard." He says, when he comes to bed at night, he's thinking about these projects and these new circuits and so on, and he can't let it go. And when he comes through the doorway into the room, she said, "Fred, his hair is standing away from his skull. He's just got all this energy inside. He must be a wizard." So that was kind of confirmation. He truly is a wizard.
The thoughts come to me when I'm listening to music. I don't approach my designs from a mathematical thing. I do it from how it feels in my heart and my soul.
The first phonograph to play back sound was invented by Thomas Edison in 1877. More sophisticated machines were soon developed, most of which had one speaker through which the music was broadcast. Over the next years, different phonograph models and then radios appeared and even took on the look of furniture. In the 1920s and 30s, television and stereo recordings became available, but were not widely used until after the Second World War, when Jim Fosgate was growing up. His drive was to become part of that history, and that ambition would at times drag him through failure and leave him penniless, until finally his persistence won through. And it all started when he was young.
I remember being very interested in electronics and radios at a very early age. I was tinkering around with them when I was just 5 or 6 years old, and of course I didn't know much what I was doing. But my father owned a radio and TV repair shop, and he was really sharp and knew everything there was to know about radios. He built the first working television in Indianapolis from parts that I thought was pretty interesting. My early years were very happy and a nice home life, and had a lot of friends. In the early grades of school, they thought I was retarded, and the teachers wanted to put me back a semester, but my parents talked them out of it. My brother, when he was 9 years old, had an ear infection that went into his brain. He was in the hospital for 6 months and finally passed away. My mother was a private duty nurse, and she took care of my brother. She would work 8 hours on shift, and then she would be in the hospital with him for about 8 hours. And she did it for 6 months, so she was so burned out when he passed, and she was just totally distraught, and took her down. Family was never quite the same.
While still a boy, Jim made his first attempt to join Edison as an inventor. by piecing together a radio scavenged from spare parts and placing it on his bicycle. Years later, this simple idea would blossom into an innovation that would change the way people hear music. However, as he grew older, a steady job with the phone company got him to set his dream aside. He went to work and made this humorous film to express the predictable pattern of his days. But it couldn't last. His imagination was calling.
I just wasn't happy at the phone company and the kind of work I was in. I wanted to do something that was more creative because it was just something burning in me that I had to explore. As a hobby, during all these years, I was a model airplane flyer and builder, and I also designed a lot of the circuits that we used to make the remote control systems.
What he first turned to was a remote radio control for model airplanes. This became his first experience in design and manufacture. He called his invention Proline.
Proline was the best. There was no equal. One of the things that we had in our local field was a lot of interference, and you could go out on certain days and people would advise you that guys have crashed on those frequencies, so it's not a good day to fly. And once we got the Proline radio, it was like, forget about interference. We would go out there and hunt down the areas that guys were saying were hot, you know, that they were getting glitches, as it's called in radio control. Places where guys were spinning in and crashing, and we'd go out and fly right through it, just repeatedly, and we'd land, and we got people to buy Proline radios by doing that, because interference was an ultimate killer of airplanes.
I went to Gorizia, Italy with the 3 U.S. team members. I was their pit crew, and they were all flying my radio back in, I think, about 1974.
However, despite the superiority of his product, his success was short-lived.
We got out of the radio control business because there were manufacturers starting up production in Japan, and they were underselling us, and that market just kind of evaporated for the U.S. So then I switched into audio, which was my other hobby.
Jim had left the security of the phone company and followed his dream. And even though he designed what many considered to be the best remote model guidance system, the company he started in order to produce it failed. This would be his first major setback. However, that failure turned him toward his real quest.
He got the opportunity to drop into our store, and he saw a product that we had there, which was an $1,100 27-band equalizer. Very complicated to set up and so on, but it transforms speakers and rooms into just enormous performance. And he studied what that product was doing as far as the shape of the equalization, and asked the question, do you suppose that there'd be a product or a market for a product that would do 80% of this with a much simpler design, but would still achieve 80% of what this is doing and sell for probably less than $150? And I said, absolutely. He began to produce what was called the Frequency Energizer. And the reason it was called Frequency Energizer is because everything it did was boosting frequencies. There was no negative cut, and the distortion was way, way lower than the typical equalizers on the market. There just wasn't any comparison of how clean it was. They were so easy to sell that we jokingly would say we could sell one to the UPS man in the short period of time he was in our store. making a delivery.
When I was working with Fred Hewlin on the audio equalizer, decided to build a power amp for the car and use that same equalizer and see what it sounded like.
He realized that one of the worst sounding environments is in a car. And one of the most pitiful frequency, or one of the most pitiful performances of speakers is in a car.
There were no good program sources, so we were really pioneering it, and most people we talked to never thought there was much of a market for car stereo.
There were just pitiful little passive amplifiers available, and it was just pretty thin.
When we had our demo car all set up and we were trying to get dealers, we would drive the car into the dealer and say, hey, I want you to come out and hear something in my car. Well, we couldn't even get them interested to come out and hear it, so they wouldn't do it. So we tried another angle. We'd say, hey, we got something wrong with my car stereo. Would you come out and give it a listen? So they'd come out, we'd turn the thing on and just blow them away.
Jim was a master at taking a car and making it have feeling. You get into it and just like, everybody was just like in awe because it was just so different and so totally better than anything you'd ever experienced in an automobile.
We went through a long design program trying to get the amp reliable and to be able to dissipate the heat. And we had to put big heat sinks on it and everything else. And we used to test our amplifiers on our river raft going down the Salt River there in Phoenix.
He took the power punch and he put it in a raft. And he went down the river with it in this raft. Big speakers and two big die-hard batteries strapped down in there and a few other people. And he picked up along the way a bunch of tubers. These guys joined in with these inner tubes riding along behind, you know, and had a pretty good bunch of people there, and the news media found out about it, sent a helicopter out to catch it for news.
The biggest challenge is with any brand new product, a lot of people just don't get it. It's hard to believe now when you look at how big car stereo is that back then it was a total uphill battle, and you had to sell it to everybody and to the magazines, at the trade shows and to the dealers, and it takes a lot of time and energy to do that.
Jim decided to have some real entertainment for the Consumer Electronics Show, so he created a dark room big enough to put a car in.
We got an idea to shoot a video and take it to the trade show and show the car in a darkened environment with a huge screen in front of the car.
And people could sit inside and hear this tremendous sound reproduction in the car, but he coupled that with video. There was a large screen outside that you looked through the front windshield and you'd see the scene. And to make the scene, he took a vehicle and put a stabilized camera on it and drove around through the various scenes in Arizona and collected a real travel scene that was fun to go along with the music in the car.
And we projected an image with a 16mm projector. We had the audio track on a reel-to-reel recorder, and we would synchronize the two.
Really carried you along and you were enjoying the sight and sound together. And then the pace picked up and the car accelerated.
You have this sense that you're going 80 or 100 miles an hour.
At one point, it literally just leaped off the edge of the Grand Canyon.
All of a sudden you realize you're not in a car. It was shot from a helicopter.
And just as it would jump up over the canyon, somebody would step on the back bumper of the car and make it shake.
You got this jolt when you were sitting on the inside. It was so fun that people would get out of that car and go back and join in the line down there to go back through it again. It was just so fun. And from then on, Jim was known for his unusual and very, very exciting demonstrations that he did at Consumer Electronics Show. They were always going to go see Jim Fosgate's exhibit.
They start production in Prescott, Arizona. The company is deluged with orders and appears to be on the verge of a great success. However, to focus on product design, Jim allows others to run the company.
I was spending most of my time in the design lab designing product and not manufacturing.
Jim needed help keeping his eye on the business anyhow because he was so into what he was doing.
He would learn that those who innovate are not always the ones who profit.
The problem was there were so many new dealers opening up in a brand new product category. A lot of them went out of business and didn't pay the bills, and so we lost a lot of receivables.
It just sort of ate itself. It just grew too fast, and he trusted it, some other people to run it for him, and it failed.
The management down in Phoenix just wasn't doing the job properly. I heard that they were making management decisions in seances.
And a lot of the dealers were experiencing financial failure, and they weren't paying for the inventories they had from him.
We ended up selling it to Rockford Corporation, which then named it Rockford Fosgate, and they've done really quite well with it. I didn't particularly believe in filing bankruptcies, but my problem was I was co-signed on all the debts of the corporation and way out past $1 million. And my lawyer told me, he said, these laws are on the books to help protect people like yourself so that you can become creative again.
In this hard time comes some good luck. He meets Norma.
I used to go outside up in Prescott and hear music. And I thought, oh boy, this is great. And it was his sound system right around the corner. And I was working with autistic children using the sound Golden Voyage. So that's what connected us, music.
I think most designers are similar to myself in that they have to have things in their life really going a certain way to be able to peak out on their creativity. Norma has just been so amazing at covering my backside and helping provide an environment like this for me to work. So I've been able to do my very best work, and she's taken the brunt of a lot of the stuff that's gone on in the business.
So we were married in this little church of my friends that held 8 people. We had to borrow $35 from a friend to pay the preacher, and we didn't have any gas in the car, so we took the truck and coasted all the way down Groom Creek where we lived.
Another thing I remember about the bankruptcy that was interesting, Norm and I, we got in a camper that I owned, and we split right after the corporation was sold to Rockford. So we were traveling around the country. We went back to Indiana to see my folks and this, that, and the other. We were actually gone for 2 or 3 months, and When we got back, we were very surprised to find out that everybody was looking for me because nobody had been paid. And at that time, when we left, we didn't realize there were going to be any problem, that I'd have any problem with the debts of the corporation, because we thought they were going to take care of that. They were all companies trying to get money out of me, but they didn't realize I didn't have anything. After they realized we only had $100 to our name, none of them showed up anymore. And when they had the bankruptcy hearing, there was not a single company there.
At that point, he was really destitute, no money coming in. He probably told you that. He was living in a triplex there in Prescott. That was probably the bottom. And then after that, when they went to Mountain Club prior to producing the decoder, I was buying TVs for him at the swap meet and taking him to his house. He was repairing them. He had a showroom in his front room.
I believe it was 79 or 80, where we went through all of his wires, everything that he could make.
Living off of things we could sell at the swap meet. I also got very tired of design work at that time and went back to one of my old trades of working on radios and TVs. We would buy them at swap meets and garage sales, and I'd fix them, and then we'd resell them. We had an ad in the paper. We called it Resale Electronics. And we were able to keep going that way.
I took him to Phoenix and sold him, and he had a pickup truck at that time with a clutch that was slipping real bad.
It was sometime in about the middle of December. So it was kind of cold, but we rolled the window down, and we had the truck full of old TVs and radios and a few car amps, and we started heading down from Prescott to Phoenix, and luckily it was downhill. We managed to baby it all the way down there. And I remember that we didn't have a dime, and we didn't even have hardly enough gas to get there. That's all we had. We sold just about $1,000 worth of stuff down there that day, and we just felt like we were rich. I remember going out and buying a Christmas tree and enough decorations that we could decorate one side of it.
They basically put it all on the line, and it could have gone either way.
We saw an ad in the Prescott paper for a place to rent. Jim called her on the phone. It was Rosalie Gordon that owned the Good Shepherd Foundation.
She told Norma that she gave us the house because she liked the sound of my voice on the phone. That was kind of funny.
He said, "We have dogs." So she said, "Okay, you've got the house." It was furnished. It was a great spot. So we moved there, and she decided that she liked us so much that she got a home right close to us.
Norma started working for her, doing her typing and things like that, and she was able to work off our rent.
So we lived rent-free for, good 4 years.
Finally, I got pretty tired of picking up these big old TVs and decided it was time to go back into design.
Jim's designs had made it possible to have high-quality sound in a car. But once again, the company he created to market and produce his technology failed. His quest had suffered a major setback. However, after a year of fixing and selling old televisions, he began to design again, but this time for the home. The typical home stereo has a receiver and amplifier that splits a recording into 2 channels, with some of the instruments and voices being broadcast through one speaker and the rest through a second. During the 70s, designers had developed systems with 4 channels and 4 speakers, which they called quadraphonic. Each speaker carried its own part of a recording. Quadraphonic sound showed promise, but it was marketed before it was perfected.
When mono was the thing and then they went to stereo, they had a lot of what they like to call ping-pong stereo to prove that, there's another channel there. So they would have a sound in one channel and then a sound in the other channel. Everybody would marvel that there were 2 of them going on. So the same problem happened with quad. To prove that the extra channels were there, they would put a lot of stuff there that was rather easily noticeable. And that was really cool for about 1.5 minutes, and then it was very uninteresting to listen to for a long period of time.
It was really complicated, and people didn't really understand the idea and thought it was just like 4 different speakers of the same sound.
Quad stirred up some initial interest and excitement, but the problem with that was that the industry didn't have a unity. There were at least two different types of quad recordings, and they would not work on the other company's product.
You have dual inventory, and that means extra cost for everybody.
So when it came to the point where there was different companies doing it different ways, the competition literally split the market. People saw this as something that was just not going to be a good thing long term.
Quadraphonic sound fails in the marketplace and goes down in flames. However, Jim believes it can be made to work.
I wanted to be able to make a product that would make these stereo recordings sound the way they do in three-dimensional, with sound coming all the way around.
I think that's why he stood out from the rest, because the other guys were engineers going, I can get the separation to 60 dB, but it doesn't change the sound. It was totally missing the plot.
Jim would now throw himself into redesigning quadraphonic sound, but it would be done by using his own unique approach, which constantly poses the question of how the results make him feel in his heart and soul.
I would have to program into my brain everything that I know about circuitry that does this, and work on the bench with oscilloscopes and watch waveforms. And what I'm doing is actually programming all of this circuit into my brain, and myself and the circuit almost become one. And it's like my whole emotional system channels into this product. And I have a feel for the product. And when I make small adjustments and nuances and things like that, it's actually a feeling I have, and I can tell when it goes one way or another. Then I have to spend a period of time just kind of letting go of it and let my mind work on it. And this is the time when I will start waking up in the middle of the night and being in kind of a half awake, half asleep state where I see these circuits in my head.
The genius doesn't stop. You know, oftentimes my mother would say, I can hear him designing in his sleep. His brain wakes me up.
I can remember getting up in the morning, go down to the lab, start working, work straight through. The next thing you know, it's time to eat lunch, and you go gobble up a lunch real quick, go right back to work. Next thing you know, it's dinner time, you get up, you do that, go right back to work again. And it's like the whole day was just a few minutes long. Worked sometimes 100-hour weeks, and that's no exaggeration, that's the truth.
Finally, he succeeds in creating what he calls the decoder, which not only integrates the music better, but more importantly turns traditional 2-channel stereo recordings into a full 4-channel quadraphonic experience. It's an amazing accomplishment.
There again, we were essentially broke, and we were just able to get there and pay for the exhibit.
The first year that he demonstrated at Consumer Electronics Show with Quad, he was so excited. He wanted people to share in this remarkable thing that could be pulled from all kinds of readily accessible software.
We put all of our eggs in this basket, this one design, and it really did work well. It sounded very good.
Jim's approach to it was totally using the existing inventory that people had. When I say inventories, I mean albums or tapes or anything that had an audio source to it could be decoded into this beautiful technology that he was working on.
However, despite this major engineering success, for Jim, the show was a dismal failure.
We honestly didn't take an order at the first show.
It was really a bummer not to take a single order and go home, and you really wonder whether this product had the potential that you thought it did.
People thought he was still playing around with Quad, but it was way, way beyond that.
The only one we sold it to was my nephew, Jeff Warburton, and we charged $600, and he never got it to work. I'll never forget it.
Because Quadraphonic had just failed, no one wanted to do anything that smacked of speakers all the right way around the room.
Once again, the quest hung in the balance. Jim was convinced that this technology would deliver great sound, but the industry turned away from it. Even so, he made a decision to start production.
There were a couple of quadraphonic publications that were circulated, one of them on the East Coast, one on the West Coast, and luckily their clientele were the ones that were buying 1 or 2 processors a week that kept us going for that whole year.
Without funds, they are forced to use their home for production. To lower overhead, some of the employees live with them, and the first products are baked in the kitchen oven. However, lack of funds was not the only problem.
And as these integrated circuits would come in, they would have to 100% inspect them, and at least half of them would be sent back because they weren't acceptable. And it's really hard to keep a product line going when you have these challenges.
Most people don't realize how tough it is to start a new technology. In the beginning, the magazines don't want to have anything to do with you. The audio stores don't want to have anything to do with you.
We were manufacturing on Montezuma. I can remember he had a bad review, and it really hurt the sales of the product. And Jim personally took one of the decoders to the magazine editor, reviewer, and showed him how to use it, and then got a good review. But the recovery time on that is, 6 months or so.
The magazines had pushed quadraphonic, and the dealers did, and it was at the shows. And they didn't want to stick their neck out again, and they didn't know if it was going to make it or not. You were kind of on your own, and it was an uphill battle. It was really hard to get it to go. During that summer, we did a demo down at Jerry's Audio in Phoenix, Arizona. And one of the fellows that I worked with got a hold of a projection TV and a Laserdisc player. When I saw it, the light bulb lit, and I realized this is the way to sell this product. That's why we decided to take it to the show the next time that way.
Here was a moment when everything hung in the balance. All of Jim's talent, his experience, the thousands of hours of effort. How long can a person sustain such a quest? They take this new idea of combining video with multiple channel sound to the Consumer Electronics Show and decide to change the quadraphonic name.
Well, we didn't know what to name our product. And so between us all, we said, let's name this Surround Sound.
The first name was a decoder, and later on the company came up with Surround Sound Processor. That actually gave you a better understanding of what was happening with the sound.
We borrowed a motorhome from one friend, and then we borrowed a Klaus 6-foot projection TV from another. And we got it to the show just the night before and set it up. And we were just so broke. I don't know how we afforded to even get the room, but we did. And we had it all up and running the next morning.
Got the idea of bringing in the system, the surround system, and putting it with video, with movies. And they had a huge screen, a very, very high, top quality projector. And people got so excited, and the music was so dramatic, and the movie was filled with a lot of action. And they would come in there and just pack in there to experience that surround sound with the picture.
And we were just a smashing success. We had people down the hallway and people in the room. We were running tube amplifiers, and it was so hot in there you couldn't even breathe. But people were just everywhere, and it was really a lot of fun.
The show is a huge success. Long lines formed to experience what Jim is calling a home theater. Whereas the problem with the show a year earlier was a total lack of interest, now the challenge was to ramp up production for all the new orders without having funds because of the bankruptcy. They decide to move to Utah, where Norma has family, and the auto stereo bankruptcy is further away. They reestablish the company in the small town of Heber, where they start production of the surround sound processor.
Hiring people that are farmers, not electricians, and that was our biggest challenge, to teach them how to work. Thank God my daughter Les came to help.
I had some computer experience at that time and came up to help, really reorganize the business aspect of things.
Jim had already asked me to leave and come down and come to work with him.
Charlie had a lot of friends and connections in the industry and many dealers that really liked him a lot. So he really connected us to a whole lot of new dealers.
When I entered Fosgate, there were no computers at all. They were running everything manually, the accounting manually, invoicing, counting parts, part by part. So they didn't have any type of computer system at the time. And we began with one, my own personal little PC.
The challenges that we all had, because we started with very little and we had to bootstrap our way. And so there were some hard, tough times for everyone involved, particularly Jim and Norma.
We had a small staff in there. They had purchased audionics equipment or electronics out of Portland, Charlie Wood, Paul Scarpelli. We had a couple technical guys that we brought in, and we actually had some departments to work with when that all happened, some marketing and people to work with all of the dealers and reps and, a little more human resource and PR. And so just started growing. It started growing pretty fast.
In spite of these financial challenges, Jim continues his push to improve the sound.
I can remember so many times that he's called me up and said, I've redone the whole system and I want you to come over and hear it.
He was always doing the frontier, breaking the barrier of new thinking and circuit design, and he was off on another circuit that was pretty significantly different and yet even better.
But we did things like center channel, subwoofers, that type of thing that were distinctly different.
Jim was driven to improve the sound quality of his processors, and he encouraged past customers to send their units back to be upgraded, and often for no cost. Both his reputation and his company began to grow.
It kept expanding slowly. We got better at the juggling. We got better relationships with the banks.
The Fosgate Audionics company that we had here in Heber was very successful. We had enlarged to where we were in a nice sized building, and we had a very nice production facility.
It took till about 90 when we knew we would gross we could have at least 50 mil a year, but we were only grossing 2 mil a year.
We realized that we needed money, and we were always juggling. There were times we couldn't get chassis material, sometimes barely making payroll. Sometimes I wouldn't take a paycheck and would defer it. Mom and Jim didn't take a paycheck for most of the time. In looking for investors, it was a little tricky because it was Jim's baby. I mean, he owned and ran and did every part of the business, and it was hard to let go. If somebody wants to invest, they either want control of some aspect of it, or you don't get any money.
And we saw that it could really do big things if we could fund it properly.
However, they are unable to attract investors, which leads to another problem.
The big companies copycatted Jim's product, and that's when the competition started.
The Japanese companies, Pioneer in particular, they even had our same model numbers on their products.
So all of a sudden, Jim's fame went boomerang, and everybody wanted what he was doing. So a lot of snakes came out of the woodwork.
No matter how fast or hard they worked, or how good their product was, they could not overcome the disadvantage of being outsized and underfunded. Unable to compete in advertising and marketing with the large corporations, the decision was made in the early 90s to sell the company to Harman International.
The point that they bought Fosgate, they were using the acquisition to jumpstart into the audio-video home theater market.
It was a good deal at the time. They stayed in Heber for a while. The employees kept jobs. They actually hired Jim on as an employee designing for them.
Then they had an opportunity to buy Lexicon, and they did. And Lexicon was a strong competitor.
Things didn't go well as I had hoped at Harman. I ended up working very hard, long hours, and a lot of different designs. I think the crushing blow was when they bought another technology that was competing with mine.
They were three big brands that they were trying to roll together, and it was unbelievable what they did and how badly it failed.
And I believe they probably promised both of us the same thing, and obviously they couldn't do it with both companies.
He was getting paychecks, and right before the end of that had received the honor of like Employee of the Year, and a month or two later he received his paycheck in the mail, and it said final paycheck, and he had no idea, but they had fired him.
We were PO'd. That's the only way to describe it, because we felt and we knew that we'd been backstabbed by politics at Harman.
It was a little bit of a problem because I'd never been fired before, so I had lost a little bit of self-confidence.
It took quite a while for him to get his steam back once again, because this wasn't the first time, that he had had such a devastating blow in his business world.
Eventually, the Fosgate brand was buried. His quest to create the perfect sound had been dealt yet another major blow.
I had to really push myself to keep on the design and keep my faith up. We had to use what little savings we had left to keep the door open while I was redesigning the circuitry. So it was kind of like roll the dice one more time and see what happens.
What followed was a period of introspection about his life and a decision to try one more time. One complication was that to avoid any conflict with Harman, he could not commit anything to paper for 6 months. So he just thought about it and became determined.
I remember telling myself that, by gosh, I was either going to design Prologic 2 and make it work, or I would drop dead trying. It was going to be one or the other, and I absolutely meant it.
He decided against simply improving his past designs and instead chose to follow a new approach. Eventually he came up with 3 possibilities, all of them laid out in their complexity and only in his head.
He thought of this new idea of this feedback loop. He hadn't used it yet either at that point.
He carried this this gigantic circuit around his head for a long, long time and hadn't even made a model of it to see if it worked.
Nearly 1 year later, he went back into his lab and built the first prototypes for his new idea.
So I put it together with circuit number 1 and turned the breadboard on and started testing it and working on it, and sure enough, just what I thought would happen, it didn't work. So then I converted this breadboard into technology number 2, started testing that, started working with it, and just like I thought, it didn't work either. So then I'm getting a little worried, and I converted to the final technology number 3, started testing that, and at first it didn't work either, and it didn't look like it was going to work, and I was really worried about it. I remember going to bed that night, and I told Norma, I said, I don't think it's going to work. And somehow during that night I woke up again, and I was working on the circuit, and I thought of a correction. Woke up the next morning early and made the correction on the breadboard and turned it on, and it worked.
He called me one day and said, I've got it. I've got the stereo and the surround. And I thought, well, yeah, was that tricky? And he says, well, it came to me one night when I was in Sedona, and I think an energy vortex got into him or something, and he went out screaming at the rocks.
I could tell it was a big breakthrough, and it was just the high of a lifetime.
However, Jim had learned that breakthrough ideas do not necessarily lead to success. Having invented and produced a number of innovative products over 3 decades, Jim found himself facing what was perhaps his last chance to bring his enhanced sound to a large audience. While experiencing serious heart problems, he drove to Las Vegas to meet with Dolby at the Consumer Electronics Show.
He was so in hopes that the guy would be impressed with it, and realize that it was a significant difference than anything else. And so he met him, and they listened and they listened.
He started playing some music through the thing, and I was listening to the vocals and how it moved the sound around, and it was really smooth.
He began to smile bigger and bigger, and at some point he told Jim, he said, this really represents a breakthrough, doesn't it?
And lo and behold, it worked. It worked beautifully.
The first step had been taken. However, convincing Dolby to develop a whole new technology in the marketplace would not be easy. Roger Dressler sat down with Jim, and together the two of them diagrammed the circuit in a way that would be acceptable. And finally, almost a year later, the presentation was made.
Ken Gundry called one day and said, well, I've read the documents, and I've looked at the schematic, and I don't really think Jim understands how the circuit works. And I took that badly because I helped him write the description. But he said, but the circuit is brilliant. And I was like, yes! I didn't want to yell too loud because he'd have heard me through the floor. But that was it.
That was the high of my life, was this design, the last design for Logic 2 Surround. Nobody can ever understand that, but there's no drug that could even come close to that. There's just nothing like it.
Hip, hip, hooray! Hip, hip, hooray!
Success, at last. In the year 2000, Dolby Laboratories acquired the rights to use the new Fosgate technology and began producing it under the name of ProLogic 2. It has proven to be immensely successful. In 2003, Jim received a special Emmy for his part in the creation of surround sound in home theater. But it was music that had inspired him, and his drive to improve the technology that delivers it would change the way everyone experiences music, at home and in cars. But for that, he had to pay a price.
Well, you could tell the stress. He was just under stress, and he say, I have to succeed. I have to do this.
His is a story that goes beyond talent. Over 3 decades, he raised the bar in every field he entered. But instead of being showered by success, those rewards were continually snatched away. He might have fallen into anger and bitterness and given up. And perhaps there were moments when he felt that way. However, in the end he trusted his passion, and against all odds moved forward until he found success.
Three things I actually admire about Jim so much. First of all, his humility. And even with all of that, he's always just such a kind and dear man. And his courage to keep going and his perseverance.
His passion is to come up with new things, and we rely on those new things that he comes up with so he can continually be re-excited.
He's just so dedicated to audio. That's, coming from that industry, I can't think of another person in the industry that has worked so hard, so long, so dedicated to perfection.
Jim's definitely the true design geek. That's not really right either. He's not a geek at all, but he's just a beautiful designer.
I think he's added richness to people's lives. That's, I guess, the simplest way to put it.
Just love the sound, and you want to share it with other people, because there's a lot of other people in the world that love their music just as much, but they can't design anything, so they're dependent on you to design these products and bring them to market.
There was a boy who had a dream to find the perfect sound.
Did that with a lot of soul searching after many, many years of hitting walls, and just he always somewhere inside of him knew what he was capable of doing.
If I don't get it the first time, he's taught me that you just keep trying, because eventually you're going to get it if you keep trying hard enough and if you work hard.
Drive that he's given me to just keep going and keep going. There's always going to be a light at the end of the tunnel.
He's always been able to be consistently inventive, and he sets the bar in his industry, and it's really driven me to always strive to set the bar in whatever I'm doing in life.
And it's really cool to see how happy he gets about some of his little pet projects that have suddenly taken off, and like the Fosgometer.
His non-assuming, if that's the right word, understated, humble way of living his life. You give him a compliment and he'll say, well, I guess.
I feel like he blessed us with the greatness of his music every time we were around him, over and over again. Just got better and better.